But what we're going to talk about today, in fact, this is a rollout, so this is quite exciting for all of us. I'm excited, and you know, being English, I don't easily get excited, but I'm excited now. We've been working for a long time on developing standardized personas for consumers. And while this, again, comes from our background, from a healthcare and wellness background, if there are any of you here who are in totally unrelated industries, these personas are broadly applicable right across all industries and businesses, not just B2C, but also B2B, as you will see. Who was in David Eagleman's talk this morning when he talked about how the brain worked, or in the Q&A we had up here? Okay. That was great, and we had him up here for a session before lunch, and I agree with 99.9% of everything he was talking about. But he's coming at it from a neurological or neuroscience point of view, a neuromonitoring point of view, looking at what's going on in the brain. So I'm going to build on that, but we're coming at this from a psychological and anthropological point of view, which sometimes it's very difficult when we have these keynotes which talk about how the brain works, to turn that into practical research application. And what I'm going to do today is demonstrate to you how, with some case studies as well as background, how you take information of the sort that he was putting out and turn that into practical market research application, and then into marketing excellence. So there's gold in really understanding the human mind. It's complex to do, but with the help of science, we can actually do it. And so that understanding is so valuable, so insightful, so actionable, it's exciting, and it's profitable. And that can be demonstrated, that getting into understanding how the human mind works, and doing that not just in a scientific way, but in the empathic way, when you really feel you understand what's going on there, under the hood, as Dr. Eagleman put it, you can turn that into profit and advantage. So why personas? The start of the story is that 7 or 8 years ago as a company, we came to the conclusion that traditional attitudinal and behavioral segmentations put together with latent class cluster analysis generally don't work. And that was because, being in that business, we saw so many failures, either failures to produce good segments or failures of the receiving company to be able to implement it. Now, we kind of worked out the reasons for that, and that's a totally different presentation, and if you want to have it sometime, just let me know. But at the very same time, when the recession was coming along, there was a demand for segmentation in markets with very small universes, such as orphan drug universes, and people didn't have the same amount of money they used to have, so looking for cheaper ways to segment markets. So our reaction was twofold. First of all, we developed a better way to do quantitative segmentation, in which we derive the rational and non-rational needs in a marketplace and present them in a choice model, and drive the segments not by latent class cluster analysis, but by latent class regression analysis. And we find that gives us very sharp and relevant segments, and then we use all the other stuff that you have put in a survey like that as profiling variables. But we also develop qualitative approaches to segmentation and consumer experiences. And tomorrow after lunch at 1:45, Anne Vermeer from Priority Health and Anne and Karen from Novum Pharmaceuticals are sharing a session in which they talk about how those kinds of techniques were used in their companies. So what is a persona? In psychospeak, a persona is a mask or a facade that we put on when we're in a particular situation. And we will behave, as Dr. Eagleman said, according to context. We're different in a conference to we are at home in front of the fireside, to what we are in a tennis match to a traffic jam. We're not different people, but our personas, our facades will be different. So it's something that we put on to look outwards to our environment. And as Jung said, and Adler said more or less the same thing, that's different from the animus or the personality which faces to our subconscious. This is about as academic as we're going to get. Because in practical meaning of market research, which is what we all want to do, a persona is a type of person that's then recruited and tracked through some kind of survey or journey, or used as a customer portrait after a segmentation, or used increasingly instead of a segmentation type. And so getting to personas can be really important. And when we got involved, when we spread outside pharmaceuticals, as we have over the last 5 or 6 years, and got involved in health and wellness in CPG and other industries, and got involved in CX and customer experience, we found that many customer experience companies who were not themselves market research companies, that wasn't their skill, were developing very shallow behavioral and attitudinal personas with very little research, and then spending all their effort pushing that through their customer experience maps. And we said, this looks to us just like the segmentation problem. We need to come up with a better way. So when people interact with a situation, it's a physician's office, a hospital, in a store, if they're deciding to go to a chiropractor, whatever it may be, the persona is saying, how should I behave? What's expected of me? The worldview, their worldview is saying, how will the world react to this? If I pull this lever, will I get what I want? Will I get what I want if I seem to be angry? Will I get what I want if I seem to be cooperative? How does the world work? And the anima, the basic fundamental personality, is striving to meet its very basic needs. So this is a little bit of a different take to what Dr. Eagleman was talking about with the emotional experience, the price experience, and the functional experience. But it's not contradictory, but we're going down to a deeper level. So to build a meaningful persona, we need to combine all the influences of the persona and the animus and set it in context. And these are just some contexts. And it could be, whether to decide what kind of gym to go to, or how often to go to a gym, or what kind of exercise equipment to purchase. Anything that's to do with health and wellness. And health and wellness stretches out a long way. We go to Lowe's or Home Depot and we pick up a can of paint, and we kind of ask ourselves, is this going to be toxic in my house? If we're not asking ourselves, is something going to be good for us? We tend to be asking ourselves, is it going to be bad for us? So to build an actionable persona, we start at the bottom with motivating values, and motivating values are a way of describing personality. They're the very fundamental things that your personality wants. And by the way, the word values doesn't necessarily imply that these are all good values, or that each of us might see them all to be good or worthy values. They're just values. The next level is worldview, how we view the world. And that's something that can change over time, but it changes much more slowly than for most people, than the developments of society around us. Which is why as people get older, they tend to start saying, well, things aren't done the way they used to be, and the place going to hell in the handbasket, and I'm ready to leave now. That's because our worldview is not keeping up with what's actually going on in the world. And then there are heuristics or behavioral economics, and those algorithms in our mind that help us take decisions without using up much cognitive resource, and that's an evolutionary device, because actually we're only able to focus on one thing at once. And while we're focusing on running away from the saber-toothed tiger, we need to remember to hop over the branches or roots on the ground so we don't fall over and get eaten. So we have all these heuristics which enable us to take quick decisions. And these are the things I'm going to be basing today's talk upon. Now on top of that, there's also language. Language shapes worldview, and worldview shapes language, and both shape behavior. As an example, bailout used to be something you did from a burning plane or a leaking boat. Now, universally in America, it means a public bailout of a nefarious financial institution. Words get shaped and wrapped around worldview. And then, of course, context. We have to look at the context and say, what are we talking about? Are we talking about diabetes, or are we talking about losing weight, or are we talking about a late-stage cancer? It's going to have a big effect. So motivating values, as I said, are a definition of personality. They're beliefs that are inextricably linked to affect. And affect in psycho-speak is feeling, not emotion, feeling. So if you have one of your driving values is you like to be benevolent and kind to the people around you, when you stop in the street and give a homeless person a $10 note, you're going to get a reward inside. You're going to get a feeling, an affect, that says, yeah, I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. This is right for me. Of course, you could get the same feeling robbing a bank if your values were somewhat different. So when you activate them, they become infused with feeling, and the relative importance of the multiple values that you have guides your actions. So here's a way of looking at global personality types. We've got 4 segments. Self-transcendence, I put I put others before myself. Self-enhancement, I put myself before others. Stimulation, excitement, even leading to hedonism. Conservation, more of a quiet life. Honoring tradition, keeping things the way they are. So obviously these two pairs are mutually exclusive. Now it's important to say that these are about motivation at the very basic level, not necessarily about action. So for example, both of our presidential candidates apparently have given over the years large amounts of money to charities. But what was their motivation? Would you put Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton in the self-transcendent or the self-enhancement bucket? That you can all answer privately to yourselves, but it's an example that sometimes actions that we take don't have the kind of motivation that you think might be attached to them. So, as we look behind these four groups, there are 10 domains or 10 major areas that define them. Self-transcendence always shows up as having in it benevolence and universalism. Universalism is caring for the whole world, all of mankind, the universe, the environment. Benevolence is more individual. Conservation is conformity, security, and tradition. Self-enhancement is achievement, self-achievement, and social power over others. And stimulation is self-direction, stimulation, and hedonism. And behind these 10 domains, there are 56 values altogether which make those up. And one of the reasons we're developing standardized personas is it's not very convenient to start a commercial survey with 56 questions just to nail down someone's personality. It's not something that you want to do on a daily basis. This particular format of personality has been tested in 45 countries all around the world over several decades and found to have very, very consistent results. So not only is it a good yardstick for us, it's a good yardstick for us between cultures and globally. The answer to the question that was posed or self-posed by its creators was, are the elements of human personality the same all over the world? And the answer is yes, they are. Now, as it turns out, because of these mutual oppositions, any personality can basically function in one or at most two adjacent segments, which gives us the capacity to have 8 types of personality. But in practice, you see stimulation combined with self-enhancement and conservation combined with self-transcendence. It's very rare that you get those other pairings. So that gives us a very manageable number of 6 personalities to work with. Now let's talk a bit about doctors. I know you're not all interested in doctors, but you may also be interested in B2B. And they're an interesting case in point because they're already a segment. Are there any doctors in the room? Anybody? No, but there's a reason for that. We're not the kind of people that want to be doctors. Right? So you don't get all humankind in the medical profession. You get kind of people that, for whatever reason, want to be doctors. And so we find 3 types, basically patient-centered, who lives up here, science-centered, who lives down here, and a very small group, these grumpy guys here, who are the narcissistic, neurotic, even psychotic group, and you can't do much with, and they're very small anyway, but they do exist. And we proved 12 years ago in a study with the Watford Medical School at the University of Illinois that we have very stable populations of these 3 types. And although it does vary according to specialty, at the overall level, this is kind of what you see. So we can do this on a B2B basis. Not everybody becomes a lawyer, not everybody becomes a doctor or an architect or an engineer or whatever it may be. So we can get a reasonably small number of personality types. Consumers, of course, are a whole lot more complex. You have the whole pageant of human diversity here. And so we have 6 types. As I showed you, we have these 6 basic types. And now for the first time, because we've completed our pilot study for a very large study of US consumers to build these personas, we have numbers. And what we're seeing is 2/3 of the population belong in this self-transcendent conservation half, and about 1/3 belong in the stimulation self-enhancement class. Now that's not surprising because the mankind, like most animal types, is split up into leaders and followers. Both of those roles have an evolutionary importance. So evolution dictates we'll have strong leaders and good followers, because weak leaders and bad followers tend to pay the ultimate price in primitive societies. They're not around anymore. So actually we were a little surprised to find as many as a third, or 35%, were in this area. This is where you find entrepreneurs, business leaders, trade union leaders, disruptors, presidential candidates, all of those kinds of people you find over here, senators, congressmen, for the most part you're going to find here. The self-transcendent conservation types are going to be much more for a quiet life, much more for keeping things the way they are, much more for caring for people on an individual basis, caring for the environment, and so on. And these 4 groups or 6 groups can be driven to a very deep level in terms of what they want and what they need. Now there's some other things about them. The stimulation self-enhancement group tend to have anxiety-free values. They tend to look towards gain instead of avoidance of loss and personal growth. Whereas your conservative group tend to have more anxiety-based values, looking to be away from loss. They're avoiding loss rather than going for gain, and they want to create protection from threat. Now, towards gain and away from loss in healthcare terms can mean I positively strive towards good health, or away from loss, I'm more reactive. When something threatens my health, I'll deal with it. However, we've got to be careful not to draw trivial conclusions. It's not to say that the people in this area, the 2/3 of them, don't necessarily go to the gym, eat well, try to manage their pre-diabetes. I mean, there's a certain leveling, and I think what we learned in Paul's presentation before, when he was talking about the pervasivity of apps, of healthcare apps and digital healthcare engagement that's coming, these things tend to be levelers. They tend to put in everybody's hands the tools to be fairly healthy. So yes, you'll see these kinds of activities that I've described on both sides of this line, because they're kind of fairly standard baseline activities for most people. What you may find over here are the people who perhaps expend some resource to have their DNA characterized, to look back at their ancestors and think about what diseases are in their family, who might want to join a hybrid concierge medical system or get a health advocate, or generally think about moving towards and think about optimizing their personal performance cognitively. They'll be the ones maybe taking turmeric or cinnamon to boost their cognitive activities or their cognitive longevity. So again, like all segmentations, this is an outrageous simplification. We have to be careful not to make it too absolute. So, story so far, we've got a robust global model of 6 basic personality types. Now, to build our personas, we want to add on some more detail. And this is where we come to talk about worldview. Now, worldview is something that you don't find in market research. The only approximation is when we measure attitudes, and attitudes are nothing like worldview. Attitudes will change overnight. Worldview is something that, as I say, changes very slowly. And the key thing about worldview is, and we all have one, is it seems commonsensical and self-evident to us, even with no supporting evidence. So right now we're in a bitterly fought election in a pretty highly polarized electorate, and on both sides the view of what should be done, who should be elected, what policies should be followed, seems to be self-evident. It's something that really doesn't require an awful lot of support. So everybody has this worldview, and it can be based on religion, politics, culture, economics, the world of entertainment, whatever it may be, we all have one. And they're tremendous drivers of action and of purchasing decisions. So somebody might say, I'll never buy a foreign car because I want to protect American jobs. I'll drive across town to such and such a dry cleaner because they're green and they protect the environment and they don't use a lot of solvents, and so on. We have a lot of those kinds of beliefs. As an example, here's a pretty famous worldview that I think most of you will recognize right off the bat. You can tell that this is a worldview because, first of all, it says it's self-evident. It does not require or even welcome evidentiary support. Right? It has the highest levels of authority and the greatest degree of permanence. And it goes on to justify actions that need to be taken based on this unsupported logic. Classic worldview. It's a beautiful worldview. I love it. It's one that has driven, of course, greatness, sacrifice, bravery and heroism, maybe some xenophobia, maybe some complacency, but it has also been used to justify and continues to be used to justify strong and maybe even extreme actions. That's the characteristic of a worldview. The final reason we know it's a worldview is not everybody in the world agrees with it. We may all agree with it, but there's plenty of people out there who have different worldviews, competing worldviews, equally strongly held, and that becomes a source of conflict. So we must never underestimate the value or the importance or the strength of the worldviews that every consumer has. Now, this is not a new idea. This was first mooted by Immanuel Kant around 1780, called it Weltanschauungen, and it's been hanging around in philosophy and anthropology and related soft sciences ever since. But it's something that we have started to take a great interest in to understand what's going on. Now, in the regular surveys that we do and the work we do with our own consumer panel, which is very highly profiled, both socially and health-wise, some of the things we find about the US Gen Pop, only 1 adult in 6 believes that the pharmaceutical companies pay any attention to safety when they put a drug on the market. Only 1 adult in 6 believes their health plan is their best interests at heart. And we're now down to less than 2/3 that believe their physician has their best interests at heart. In November 2008, when President Obama was elected, that number was 72%. So that's a stonking gate drop of 10% in confidence in physicians. And we've been not just measured it twice, we've been measuring it kind of about every 18 months, right the way through this particular presidency. So when you see these kinds of worldviews, it makes all the sense in the world that people might not want to engage with doctors, they might not want to engage with drugs. They may be much more comfortable engaging with a healthcare app, for example, that at least tells them what they might do. So moving on from that to behavioral economics, and what Tversky and Kahneman taught us was that decisions are not always rational. Dr. Eagleman this morning talked about Homo economicus versus Homo sapien. And he's right. From the founding fathers lived in a time when Adam Smith and Jean-Jacques Rousseau were the leading philosophers, and everybody believed that individual decisions by well-informed citizenry, male citizenry of course at the time, would lead to decisions that were in the best interests of everybody. That's why they believed that there would never be political parties, that the people would operate individually. That's why political parties are no part of the Constitution. And it's taken us a long time to learn that decisions are not necessarily super-logical or super-rational. But this doesn't equate to ignorance or stupidity. It comes about from a combination of personality, context, and of course, worldview. So how often when we're behind the screen in research do we see a doctor or a consumer or a patient or whatever saying something and people are saying, oh, it's so illogical, it's so emotional, AKA it's so dumb, why could they possibly say that? Well, they're not dumb or stupid people, and they're applying logic. And one thing the human brain does almost impeccably is it manages logic. That's pretty much all the cerebral cortex does. It manages logic and it reacts to emotion, but it doesn't generate that emotion that comes from the cerebellum. So when you think about how people make decisions, their motivating values, their very basic needs, and their worldview give a set of assumptions. Those assumptions are processed by logic and they get to a conclusion. And that piece is pretty constant for all human beings. This is the cause of variation, is the assumptions you make. If you assume the pharmaceutical company is full of wicked people who are just trying to make profit and don't care how many people they poison, it makes an awful lot of sense not to wait to take a pill, or at least not want to take one unless you're dying or in a very severe state. And heuristics and the context of the situation are also taken into account in this logical process because, again, the heuristics are designed to short-circuit our use of cognitive resources and get to a decision very, very quickly. So we now have 123 experimentally validated heuristics. I've got a list of them. It's certainly more than I can ever remember, but it is a great toolbox. And some of them are like risk aversity, are pretty easy to understand. Gold standard thinking. A gold standard thinking person believes there's one right way to do everything. And if you've got another way that you want them to take, it's going to take a lot of marketing and sales energy to kick out that right way and substitute yours. But once you've done it, you're relatively secure because it's going to take the next guy a lot of energy too. The opposite is a flexible thinker who treats each situation on its own merits afresh, as if it's never happened before. That's the other extreme of that scale. And that kind of person, you can convert to your idea very quickly, but so can the next person who comes along. So there you have to use a lot of energy to keep them on your solution. Win-win abundance, win-lose scarcity, very important. Win-win abundance people believe what they want in life is in abundant supply, and if they do the right things, they'll get what they need. In a spiritual Christian, that translates into the Lord will provide. In other religions, there are parallel concepts. Many spiritual, religious, and philosophical concepts mirror heuristics. Why? Pretty obvious. That's where they came from. A win-lose scarcity person believes that the things they want in life are in inherently short supply, and if they give them up, they'll never get them back. You can test yourself silently. Do you have a closet full of things that might come in handy someday? Are you a hoarder to some extent? Do you have trouble spending money on yourself, particularly for luxuries? You're a win-lose scarcity type. Right? You want to preserve resources. So that has a big, big impact on how people make spending decisions in any kind of circumstance. Stop loss, the ratio of how much effort you put in to avoid losing $10 to how much effort you put in to gaining $100. Lots of experimental background to that. The stop loss ratio is very important. We deal with sick patients, a patient whose level of health is here, and you say, you know what, I've got a drug, a procedure, a spice, whatever it is, I can put you up there. But I have to tell you, there's a small chance I could put you down there. Most patients won't go for it because the penalty for losing a few points more of their health quality of life doesn't make it worthwhile in their minds taking the risk of getting a bigger one. So they go on and on and on, and that's what we need to load up into our personas. So let's look at some case studies. I've obviously sanitized this, but I want to take you on a few simple slides to show how you can work through these various levels with standardized personas or with personas being created on a custom basis and get yourself to an influential campaign. So this is Roberta. She's an example of a healthcare consumer of a certain kind. So her personality is definitely in the self-transcendent. She's a benevolent, universalist person. She's firmly in that top segment. Preserving and enhancing the welfare of the people around her is a very important activity for her, and when she does it, it makes her feel good. It gives her that affect. Her worldview is that everybody really should be able to coexist productively. We should love and protect the earth. Our bodies are our temples. I mean, just by looking at Roberta and the picture I've chosen for her, you got a pretty good image right away of the kind of person that she's going to be. Heuristically, she's a change agent. She's an early adopter. She's a win-win abundance person. She thinks that the things that are going to be, that she needs in life are going to come to her if she just does the right things and work hard. She's big picture. Big picture people absorb information in large chunks and random order. They need to keep the big picture in mind. They do very poorly with bullet points and detailed explanations and insurance policies. They tend to absorb the beginning of a message and not the end of it. They're the people who, if you call them into your office to explain what you want them to do, are rushing out of the door halfway through the explanation because they think they've grasped it already. So that tells us a lot about how we're going to communicate with this persona. She's internal locus of control, which means that she makes her mind up about things based on external information coming from multiple sources and judged according to internal criteria. She's no pushover. From an accessibility point of view, she has a strong personal support network. She does web-based research for healthcare. She listens to her doctor, but that's just one source of information. And she's a solution seeker. So high-gain concepts for dealing with Roberta are support physical, mental, and spiritual health. For consumers, there are either 3 or 4 legs to well-being. Spiritual, mental, and physical health combined are their healthcare well-being, and in many cases, the 4th one is financial well-being and the lack of stress. And those of you here this morning for the first presentation by Manulife, that was something that was emphasized in what they're trying to do with their financial services, is keep people out of financial stress, and by doing that, keep them also out of physical stress and illness. The choice is yours. That's another high-gain concept. She's internal locus of control. You don't tell Roberta what she thinks. She figures it out for herself. You assess and decide, trust your own judgment. From readership and viewership, that's just plain demographics. You can get that from Nielsen, but she's a volunteer, she's a support group member. She doesn't look at TV or movies. Word of mouth are important to folks in this kind of persona. So client strategy, for whatever it may be, and we're not talking about drugs here, we're going to talk about that in just a moment. We're talking about whatever it is we may be wanting to sell to Roberta, even if it's not a directly healthcare related product, is relate to the customer with values and actions as well as words. You won't easily fool Roberta. If you say you're in favor of the environment, you better be giving some money to the environment. Manifest insincerity doesn't work. When Roberta goes to a hotel and sees that little card in the bathroom that says, oh, we put so much detergent into the environment, would you please leave hang up your towel and use it again? Roberta figures out that that's a cost-saving device that's actually promulgated by a few companies on behalf of the hotels, because the hotel is showing no other evidence of being interested in the environment whatsoever. So she kind of sees through that, and it becomes a negative, not a positive. I see through it too. So, target outcome. Roberta will absorb our brand into her life because it resonates at the deepest levels. This little thing over here, I include it because it's very pretty. It's Plutchik's Affect Flower, and using again the term affect for feeling. You may not be able to see all the detail, but there are a lot of feelings around here. And Roberta's kind of in optimism, which is kind of between a level of serenity and a level of interest. That's kind of where we place them. You can only place people on that scale empirically, not numerically. So now you could take Roberta, and in this case what we did, it was for a hospital, where we wanted to look at why the patient journey towards and through an elective surgical process or procedure. So here we have, this is all in Greek ink, so don't strain to read it, but here we have that description of Roberta, and here the interaction with the PCP, the surgeon, the hospital experience, the discharge, all the dynamics of the process. Here is the input from the healthcare providers. Here is the dynamics, the nature of the discussion. Was it a monologue? Was it a debate? Was it information passing? Here are the inflection points where our client, the hospital, could make a difference to that journey. Here were the factors that were important in those inflection points, and here were the decisions being made. And this will be a top slide of a series of slides to get right into this type. So obviously when I'm showing you a very simplified and sanitized case here, the real case will be more detailed, but not actually more complex, and that's important to understand. Now here I've just put some vegetables and a grocery stand in there, and you can translate this into a primary physician they're saying you've got to lose weight or do something about your diet, leading to research, leading to a retail experience, leading to repeat behaviors or not. And what goes on in the middle here, this is your map, and it has numbers in it that shows you how many people are passing through which stage, and how many people are dropping out, how many people are coming in. So this is standard CX stuff. Many of you will have seen it before. The difference is the sophistication of the analysis and of the persona that we're putting through it. So the campaign, multiple information sources, customer stories, information reinforced in retail stores, grocery stores in this case perhaps, a holistic customer support program demonstrating that we understand that spiritual, mental and physical health are united, and a digital campaign. Why these things? Because the multiple information sources works directly with her internal locus of control. She needs to hear things from different places. Put it on BeReal and get it on television, put it in a local paper, have it pop up in different places. Customer stories relate to her benevolence and empathy. She doesn't want to hear what 100 people did, she wants to hear what one person did and how it turned out for them. Reinforce it in the store when she gets there, support a belief in the alternative and natural. Digital campaigns give you very quick access. So finally, supposing Roberta, same person, same persona, turns out to be a hematology patient, a blood cancer patient. And in this case, we have a history. She's a stage 3+. She was diagnosed 3 years ago. Her prognosis is moderately poor. She has, however, taken herself off to Cancer Centers of America. So she's used all these skills and understandings to manage her own treatment, and instead of going to a local oncologist, hematologist, or even more of a local hospital, she's taken herself off to CCA. She has the same set of accessibility. One of the things to bear in mind here is that she's strongly looking for ways to shelter her family from the emotional and financial impact of her probable demise. So high gain concepts remain the same. That remains the same. Client strategy is to supply info online and through CCA, keep the big picture to high gain concepts in view, keep the detail in small manageable chunks, make sure that CCA is endorsing what you're saying, because the target outcome is to get to use drug A adjunctively with her other treatments and establish remission, but build confidence in the product treatment so that when the progression comes back, as it most likely will, there's going to be acceptance of the reuse of product A. On Plutchik's effect flower, she's moved from an optimistic position quite slightly to more of an aggressive position. This is now a cornered animal. This is somebody who's facing the worst of all perceived outcomes, so that she now is going to show a little more aggression, a little more pushback. She's not going to be nasty or awful or horrible, but she's just going to be more aggressive. And aggressive doesn't just necessarily mean it's going to be aggressive to people or institutions, but aggressive in her self-treatment, aggressive in her pursuit of what she needs. And so the program looks almost exactly identical. In fact, it pretty much is identical, except for the change of language. The reasons for doing all these things are the same. Why? Because it's the same persona. You know, she may be at risk of death, but Roberta is the same person that she was when she was a healthy consumer not all that long ago. So the robustness of this approach is partly that once you've got these standard personas, you obviously need to add language, you obviously need to add a lot of context, you obviously have to do primary research in the context or connection of your situation, whatever it is you're doing, but the fundamentals of the person remain the same. And if they don't remain the same, there's something wrong, because there are only so many fundamental types of human action. Now, I'm not advocating personas and qualitative segmentation to replace quantitative segmentation. We do both. They have different uses and purposes. A statistical segmentation, qual-quant, can take 6 months or more. It's more costly. You get a statistical typing tool, which may or may not be a good thing for you. But they have a very broad range of applications. You can use them for forecasting. You can use them for sales force distribution or distribution point, shop retail outlet distribution, building your network for inventory control. You can use these things to input to an awful lot of processes. Persona building has a pretty wide range, but it takes less time, it's less costly, but it has very specific uses in program and message design, in customer experience, in purchasing, in patient journey, or as a qualitative segmentation in and of itself. So it's horses for courses. You make the selection. I'm not advocating one over the other. Now, you may have noticed I've gotten the whole way through this peroration, I haven't used the word emotion once. And there's a reason for this. People have been trying to define emotions since Aristotle's second book of something or other. And people have come out with all kinds of lists and ranges of emotions. You can easily find them on the internet. Generally speaking, 80% of all the emotions defined are negative, and all the lists are different. And there's absolutely no scientific understanding to any great extent of how emotions drive behaviors except in emergent conditions. If there's a big explosion at the back of the room, we'd all panic and run out that way. That's a kind of an emotional response based on fear. Jealousy, rage, these are examples of emotions actually taking over and driving actions. But emotions typically are not drivers of actions. They're the visceral output of the psychological processes that drive actions. They're a side stream. So the whole industry of emotional driver research, generally speaking, not based on any real credible science, quite often, just like segmentation on an attitudinal and behavioral basis, fails to satisfy. It seems fine when we get the presentation, but when it gets to what do we do with it, it gets a little bit difficult. So as Dr. Eagleman said this morning, the brain is very, very, very complicated, extremely complicated and multi-layered. And this is what I've said is an outrageous simplification of that, but at least it's workable and manageable. But just to deal with emotions and rational, so-called rational drivers, in and of itself just isn't enough. And I think we're pretty much arriving at the understanding generally across industries that that is the case, that it's failing to satisfy. So standardized personas are becoming a tool for speedy, cost-effective, and profound application of psychology and anthropology to market research. They're a useful tool in the right circumstances, properly applied. They're not a universal panacea. They're just something that you can and should consider. And like all moderators, I've used up my time almost exactly, but I certainly can take any questions, comments, MSAs, RFPs, purchase orders. It's all good.